coffee. That's interesting. I think what's been on my mind is a conversation I had, well, Discord conversation I had last night with some of the students, right? And it's this idea that one of the lecturers, not me, is quite boring because all they would do is talk about politics. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going down that track, And I've had teachers in the past where they would talk constantly about politics. I'm like, I used to hate that. So what is it about? What is it? Well, I think I have never been a political person. It's never really kind of entered into my radar. What world leaders were doing is up to them. I just wanted to create my art. But I think the events of the last 4 years have sort of brought that into sharp relief. And I found myself tripping down that path. I always used to wonder about other fathers. They'd get up in the morning, have their breakfast, open up their morning paper, and they'd read about politics. And I'd be like, hey, hand me the comic section. That's how deeply invested I was in it. But I think as you get older, you get a little bit of an awareness of the world. I think there's a quote as a Japanese emperor. Now, I've spent years trying to track down who it was. I know it was a Japanese emperor. I know it wasn't Hirohito. But this was at a time when Japan was opening its doors to the West. And this emperor's advisors were saying, are you sure this is a wise idea? What you're doing? And his response was, and he was older. He was an older emperor. He said, his response, let me see if I can get this correct. He said, when you're 20, the only thing that matters to you in your world are your buddies, your mates, people around you, your tight crew. And when you get to your 30s, you start to think about your village, your town. Your identity is shaped by the town that you lived in, or perhaps even the province. And then when you're 40, you start to develop this nationalism, this pride, it's all about your country. When you're 50, you start to think about your place in the world, right? And I thought that's really interesting. It's an interesting observation because I find myself going through that same kind of journey. And I think it was supplemented by travel, right? So the more you travel, the more you, that's an old cliche, the more you travel, the more you realize how small the world is. But I think what it is you start to identify similarities. And you just get an interesting flavor for what the world is doing, which I think is infinitely fascinating, right? I think it's part and parcel tied to being a commercial artist because you like to appeal to the rest of the world, wouldn't you? So I think understanding how they think is one of the big things. So I think I'm going on that journey, and that's why politics has become sort of a focus. But again, relating back to sort of observations about behavior, I was thinking about sort of the dichotomy of what humanity is going through and the polarization of it and all this kind of stuff. And it was spurred on because over the last couple of days, I decided to catch up on The Equalizer duology, I guess, with Denzel Washington. And it made me think about Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, right? So Save the Cat. One of the edicts of Save the Cat is that at some point your hero has to save the cat, hence the title, right? Or do something that emotionally triggers the audience to be on their side. And there's been various discussions of this on the few Facebook writers groups that I'm involved with. But I realized watching The Equalizer, it's not necessarily a moment. It's not necessarily a singular event, right? Because Denzel Washington, through and through, his character, Robert McCall, is just a good person, even though he does these horrendous acts. You are willing to forgive his brutalities against the bad guys because he's such a deeply good person. So I thought that was interesting. It threads through the mythos of Batman as well, right? Reinforced by the movie moment when Christian Bale had a gun, had an opportunity to avenge the deaths of his parents, and didn't do it, and threw the gun in the river. You know, and Batman's known as the Dark Knight, one of the more brutal superheroes. So I started thinking about Save the Cat and understanding that with your characterizations, it's not necessarily a moment or event. It's just that your audience has to get a clear-cut idea that your main character is good through and through. You can heap them with all kinds of problems. And then we'll talk about the 6 things wrong with a character, right? But you can heap all kinds of problems. Alcoholic, broke, negligent father, you name it, right? As long as the audience gets through and through that they're a good person. And Denzel Washington's character did it with a series of small acts, larger acts as well. But we got to see, you know, every movie has a day in the life sequence, right? So we'd see a day in the life of Robert McCall and these little things that he would do that were random acts of kindness, right? So I think that that's sort of important. So when I'm thinking about the politics of polarization, I think that's what's essentially missing in terms of how we regard people, right? We see them as singular entities, incapable of you know, multiple personas, not in a not in a schizophrenic or an MPD sort of way, but just multidimensional, right? We fail to see people as multidimensional, and I think that to me is what resonated with Equalizer, is that even though Denzel Washington, or Robert McCall rather, was a brutal killer, I could see how that happened by following him on his journey as he tries to find redemption with all these little moments of kindness. It's interesting. Oh yeah, I'm going to be diving into Houdini this morning and doing a little bit of research on Solaris and pre-visualization and look development inside of Solaris using the Karma renderer. So a lot of that is just sitting and experimenting. So I'm probably not going to stream that, but I'll pop back on. I do have to do a session for the BFI crew, which I'll probably do tomorrow, and then we'll take it from there. So good morning, guys, and I'll keep you in the loop.